Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one where we dive into tons of interesting topics, and another where we just dive into tons of interesting books and stories. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. So today, let's learn all about the history of tennis. Yes, this sport named tennis. Where did the name tennis come from? What's up with the crazy scoring? Why, if you have no points, is it love all? Yeah, it's love all. Well, we'll answer all these questions and we'll dive into this amazing sport called tennis. So yes, right off the bat, where did the name come from? It goes back to medieval France. Back in the 1100s, monks started playing this game. It was a form of handball, and the monks would yell out, "Tenez!" which was basically a warning. Translated, tenez meant hold, take, receive. It was their way of saying, hello, watch out, I'm about to serve. So eventually, when the game came over to England, it got morphed into more of like a 10A, and eventually tennis. So yes, it was monks that started playing, and it was our version of handball. They were in long robes, right? There was no nets. It was just about hitting a ball back and forth with the palm of their hands. The game at first obviously was rough. It was awkward. Players eventually ended up wrapping cloth around their hands for protections, then using gloves, and they were finally then using wooden paddles. By the 1500s, stringed rackets started appearing. The balls originally were handmade from cork, and they were wrapped tightly with wool or leather. The courts were often indoors. They no rectangles. They were just kind of wherever you could play the game. There was crazy angles, walls, roofs the balls could bounce off of. This early form, what we know as today as tennis, they called royal tennis. Why? Yeah, because it was mostly played by kings and nobles. The most famous fan of this early game was Henry VIII of England. Yes, the man who ultimately started the Church of England, wanted to get divorced from Catherine of Aragon, but that's a whole different story. But suffice it to say, he loved this sport, and yeah, it wasn't for ordinary people at the beginning. Courts were expensive, they were difficult to build. Meanwhile, during this time, the 1800s that we're talking about, many sports were beginning to take like an organized form. Soccer is at this point developing some of their standardized rules. You had rugby that was coming into its own, cricket, wildly popular. And there were these croquet lawns that were appearing across England in the backyards of people who had money. The British upper class loved outdoor recreation, and this was the perfect environment for tennis to take off. In case you're not familiar with croquet, it's still out there. You know, summertime, out there in a nice lawn. You had these long-handed mallets, and you would kind of basically hit these colored, big, hard balls. They were almost like the size of softballs today. You would hit them through these wire little hoops. They were called wickets. And ultimately, your goal was to get through the entire course, the entire lawn in a specific sequence, and then you got to hit this wooden stake at the ends. It was almost more like golf, but this was the game originally that people were playing. So it's in this environment. It's 1873, and there's this British Army officer. His name is Walter Clopton Wingfield. He patented a brand new version of this game of tennis that could be played outdoors on grass. It eventually became known as lawn tennis. Again, why? Because it was played on the early lawn courts that were set up for the croquet game. The game originally, listen to this, had an odd hourglass shape. It was narrow in the middle and wider at the ends. The net is high. And the rules, nope, they're all over the place. But people loved it. Why? Because the game would be portable. It wasn't any more about being indoors. You could play it obviously on grass, country clubs, estates, parks. It spread throughout Britain and all across America as well, Europe. The most important development came in 1877 when the All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club host the very first Wimbledon tournament in London. At that first event, only men could compete and just 22 players entered. The winner was this gentleman by the name of Spencer Gore. He beats William Marshall, and you're thinking, Wimbledon, what's up with the name? Where does it come from? Yeah, it actually comes from the district where the courts originated in southwest London. And it goes back to a gentleman named Windman that owned the property. And we're talking, again, going back to 950 AD. So, of course, over time, the name evolved into Wimbledon. And Wimbledon changed everything. They established a dress code. There's this all white. Still today, you can only wear white if you're playing. The Victorian Society considered visible sweat embarrassing. So the white clothing supposedly hid the perspiration better than the darker colors. Wimbledon still, like I said, requires players to wear almost entirely white clothing, making it one of, no doubt, the strictest dress code in sports. It's been challenged through the years, still is challenged today. And other than the dress code, it standardized certainly the court shape, the size of the net, and oh yeah, the scoring system. Let's talk about the strange scoring system. I'm with my neighbor just a couple days ago. This is where the origin of this episode comes from. My neighbor loves tennis. He is always going to the U.S. Open, going back originally to Forest Hills in Queens and now to Flushing Meadows in Queens. So we're talking about this great tradition and how much he's excited. You know, Labor Day is coming up at the end of the summer. He's going again. And I say, no one cares about tennis. And then what popped into my head? I said, tell me, all right, where's this coming from? You have a match. You have a game. I get it. There's different names all over every sport. You win a few games, then you win a set. But what's with this? The points starts off at love. No, not 0, 0, 0. It's love all. Then you go to not 1 point. You go to 15. Then you go to 30. Naturally, then you would go to 45, right? No, you go to 40. Are you kidding me? So here's the answer. There's a lot of theories, but the most accepted explanation involved clocks. The early French tennis courts may have used a clock face to track the points. The player winning 1 point moved the hand to 15, then to 30, and then, yes, to 45. Then the game was over, right? One full turn around the clock. Over time, 45, it was shortened to 40. Why? Apparently because it was quicker to say, and then that allowed for deuce. Deuce, again, that means when it's tied, it's 40 to 40. What the heck is up with deuce? Well, apparently that came from the word doigt. That means two in French. Why? Because a player must win 2 consecutive points at that point to win the game. In case you didn't know that, right? The game is going to go on forever unless you win by 2 points. That's winning a game. Then you must win what they call a set by winning 6 games. And again, you will have tiebreakers because you can't win just by 1 game. You have to win by 2 games to win a set. Again, that's why it can go on and on and on. And then in terms of winning a match, there's usually 2 formats, usually best of 3. A player has to win 2 sets to win a match. But in Grand Slam tournaments, which we will talk about, you've got 4 primary great individual tournaments for both men and women. You've got Wimbledon, you've got the French Open, you've got the US Open, and you've got the Australian Open. In those matches, you have to win 3 sets to win a match. Now listen to this. The longest match ever was actually in a Grand Slam tournament. It was a first round matchup in 2010 in Wimbledon between an American by the name of John Isner and a Frenchman by the name of Nicolas Mahut. It lasted 11 hours and 5 minutes over the course of 3 days. They had to cancel each day because it was getting dark. I mean, just the 5th set alone lasted 8 hours and 11 minutes. By itself, just that set would have been the longest match in history. At this point, starting in 2022, they implemented a final set 10-point tiebreaker rule at 6-6. So this, no doubt, will be one of those records. You can put it down, trivia that will never, certainly, ever be broken unless they change the rules again. So love, what's up with it being 0-0 being called love? When the baseball game is 0-0, it's 0-0. Same with football. You go right through every sport. Apparently, you can plant your flag on one of 2 theories. It's either love because a 0 looks like an egg, or it's just 0 because they played for the love of the game. No financial incentive to play. The English version coming out of the Oxford English Dictionary meaning love, the word love deriving from the old expression to play for love. The egg version of the story goes with the French word for egg is l'œuf. Again, the 0 looking like an egg, but there's no recorded evidence of a French player actually using that word. In fact, English players were known to use the word duck egg or goose egg to describe a score of 0-0. Hey, but despite all this, the name stuck, and that's what it is. So tennis spreads through the late 1800s, and here's the thing. It was a sport right from the beginning with women as well as men. And this is surprising because this is not the case, as you know, for a lot of sports. Wasn't ladylike to play necessarily too many sports. Right or wrong, this was just the time period. But listen to this. Only 7 years after they began playing official tournaments at Wimbledon, in 1884, women started playing the matches as well. But talk about restrictions, and again, you can go back to my episodes on the women's suffrage movement in America with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But you would not believe this. At first, they had to wear on the court long dresses, corsets, hats even, right? And of course, this made their movements difficult, but the women pushed back again, along with this progressive era with women having more rights in general. And of course, now that they were out there playing the sport in public with audiences, no, the restrictive clothing still had to wear white, but no, they were able to wear more clothes appropriate for an athletic endeavor. The sport quickly expands throughout the world. France develops this clay court tradition. Australia embraces tennis through its British influence. And of course, the United States starts holding national championships in the late 1800s as well, eventually creating what we know now as the U.S. Open. And why is the U.S. Open in New York? Originally was actually played in Newport, Rhode Island, which was a wealthy summer destination. But it moved to Forest Hills in Queens, and now it's a huge, massive complex right next to the old fairgrounds in New York City, right next to Current City Field where the New York Mets play. So here we are all these years later. You've got Wimbledon that's played in England on grass courts. You've got the French Open in Paris that's played on clay courts. U.S. Open in New York City, hard courts, almost like asphalt or concrete. And the Australian Open in Melbourne, yes, hard courts as well. If you win all four of these tournaments in a single calendar year, it's called a Grand Slam. Along with golf, it's one of the rarest accomplishments in sports. Why? Because it's a different way of playing the game. Of course, golf, you have different courses and you have to adjust based on every different hole. Some courses are more difficult than others, and that can affect your play. But think about this. If you're playing on grass, that produces a fast way of playing. The ball literally jumps off the grass quick. Clay slows the ball down, and it gives you long rallies. Whereas the hard courts, they're like somewhere in between. The different surfaces produce different champions and styles through the years. One of the first global superstars was Rod Laver of Australia. I remember him when I was a kid. The first player to win 2 calendar year Grand Slams in the modern era. Then you had someone by the name of Bjorn Borg. He was this guy from Sweden. He had long hair and he was really calm under pressure. And his big rival was John McEnroe, the opposite. Yeah, he had long hair as well, but he was younger and he was a firecracker. He would have these outbursts. You have got to be kidding me. You cannot be serious. He no doubt moved the game into a different stratosphere where you had quiet, gentlemanly games, respectful games, and now you have this young, brash personality that's coming in, yelling at the scorer, disrupting the game. This was so controversial at the time, but here we are all these years later in 2026 at the recording of this episode, and certainly he is well respected for his talent that he had. And going back to his rivalry with Bjorn Borg, the 1980 Wimbledon final was considered by many the greatest tennis match ever played. I'll never forget it. I was at camp in Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and we had a break going back to our dorms, and we were all sitting there. We couldn't leave watching this match. Borg won in 5 sets. But the 4th set tiebreaker became legendary. McEnroe is screaming at the officials, and Borg is remaining ice cold. I mean, if you saw it, you can still picture it today. Go to YouTube. It's worth the time. Borg is waiting from his serve from McEnroe, and he's bobbing back and forth, moving from left to right. So iconic. And speaking of iconic, you start from the 60s. These are the names that made tennis so famous. Rod Laver, Ken Rosewall, Arthur Ashe, Bjorn Borg I mentioned, McEnroe, Jimmy Connors, Ivan Lindell, Boris Becker, Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and today, Novak Djokovic and Carlos Alcaraz. The women, starting from the 60s, Billie Jean King, Margaret Court, Chris Evert, Martina Navratilova, Steffi Graf, Monica Seles, Venus Williams, her sister Serena Williams, and yeah, today, Naomi Osaka. I mean, going back to Billie Jean King, you have to know what happened in 1973. She played against this gentleman by the name of Bobby Riggs. He had come out and said that no woman could defeat a man playing tennis. It was called the Battle of the Sexes, and more than 90 million people watched it on TV. And yes, Billie Jean King won in straight sets. Now, some of you may remember this. Going back years, and yes, I can remember this, you played with wooden rackets, and the ball was white. It only changed to yellow in 1972, and it was this optic yellow, right? We all know that today, but it was all about it being easier to be seen on color television. That was when the transfer happened in the early 70s. Now most people had color TVs instead of black and white TVs. Yes, those wooden rackets I referenced, you needed to be such a better tennis player. And it can be argued, they had standardizations around the equipment you could use. That sweet spot was so harder to hit. You needed it right smack in the middle to hit it well over the net. And metal rackets clearly changed everything. One of the first early models was the Wilson T2000. It was used by Jimmy Connors. I can see it now. Jimmy Connors was famous. Again, you can go look on YouTube for playing with the strings as he was trying to concentrate, as he's waiting for that serve from his opponent. And it was a big deal in our house. My mother was a big tennis player early on. She actually, fun fact, she was originally given lessons from Chris Everett's father back in Larchmont, New York. As a family, we went into the bowels of this water treatment facility that was turned into tennis courts out in Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. We would play tennis every weekend. That's where my joy for the sport began. An entire family activity. It was fantastic. I'd go out into high school, and then just to talk about a sport that you can definitely stay in shape with, played with a friend named Charlie Lacey all through high school. And getting back to the technology, with wooden rackets, you couldn't generate extreme spin because the rackets were heavy and they were flexible. The modern graphite rackets changed that completely. Rafael Nadal is famous for his incredible topspin. And that would have been, like I said, impossible with the old wooden rackets. His forehand sometimes spins over 3,000 revolutions per minute. That topspin makes the ball dip suddenly and bounce really high. That's what differentiates the professionals from just the average player. And what was also interesting, when tennis first started out, very often it was the amateurs that played in the prestigious tournaments, in the Grand Slam tournaments. Professional players were banned. And so they played on a separate tour. But after, like I said, 68, they merged, and now it was professionals and amateurs that competed together for prize money. And now, just to wrap up the podcast, some few fun facts. Wimbledon, because they have grass courts, they used to, a long time ago, use live animals to protect the courts. Why? Pigeons and birds would eat the grass, so they would have hawks, falcons, in some cases even dogs that would prowl the grounds just to keep those pesky birds away. And the grass, it has to be cut to the exact height every day during the tournament. And you talk about maintaining a lawn. You have to have some of the best professionals in the business taking care of Wimbledon. Tennis players used to serve underhand. Today, obviously, they're rare. But in the early days of lawn tennis, of course, it's like badminton, right? Now, the overhand serve, talk about a specialty. Some of the serves can exceed 150 miles an hour. The fastest recorded serve is 163 miles an hour by Sandgroth, the Australian. Now, finally, I've mentioned this a few times, but Golf and tennis, both premier individual sports for the most part. Yes, they play doubles in tennis, but both are known to be individual sports, and they're both known, although they developed centuries apart, certainly they came into its own in terms of popularity around the world. Certainly golf a little bit earlier in the 50s and 60s, and then tennis definitely took off in the 70s. But tennis could be considered the loudest, quiet sport in the world. Just like someone takes a golf swing at a golf tournament, you're supposed to be quiet. Same thing with the back and forth with the volleys. For decades, crowds were expected to stay quiet during the points, but the players, that has evolved as well. They are not quiet, especially Monica Seles. She became famous in the 1990s for grunting loud noises during the matches. And listen, it's psychological edge, a lot of people have said, but ultimately, you can hear the noise, whether it's the players making noise, the squeaking shoes, the racket strings snapping, hitting off of the concrete or hitting the net. That's all you will hear. And certainly the television has all the microphones there strategically so you can hear the competition back and forth. And then you make a good point and the crowd will erupt at that moment. Friends, I hope you've enjoyed this journey that we've taken learning all about the history of tennis. Reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group, OK Let's Learn. We have a YouTube channel, OK Let's Learn. Hit the plus sign in the top right-hand corner in Apple Podcasts. That'll subscribe you to the podcast. You can get the episodes automatically downloaded on your phone. We're getting episodes out every couple days. Tell a friend. Tell a neighbor, tell anybody in your life that certainly loves podcasts, or loves to learn and is curious. Friends, until next time, have fun and keep learning.